The steel doors of Riverside Women's Correctional Facility clanged shut behind Maya Chen as she shuffled forward in orange prison garb, her wrists shackled and her dark eyes downcast. At 25, she was petite at barely 5'2", with long black hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and a face that bore no makeup or expression. To the other inmates watching from their cells, she looked like easy prey. "Fresh meat," muttered Carla Rodriguez from behind the bars of cell block D, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had ruled these corridors for the past 8 years. At 34, Carla was everything Maya appeared not to be: tall, muscular, covered in tattoos that told the story of a life lived on the streets of East Los Angeles. Her reputation as the prison's most feared inmate had been earned through years of violence and intimidation. Officer Janet Martinez, a 20-year veteran of the correction system, escorted Maya down the long corridor lined with cells. The afternoon sun streamed through barred windows, casting harsh shadows across the concrete floor. The sounds of the prison filled the air: distant conversations, the clank of metal doors, and the ever-present hum of fluorescent lights that never quite managed to banish the institutional gloom. "Listen carefully, Chen," Officer Martinez said quietly as they walked. "I'm going to give you some advice that could save your life in here. Keep your head down. Don't make eye contact with the wrong people, and whatever you do, stay away from Carla Rodriguez and her crew. They run this place, and they don't like new fish who don't show proper respect." Maya nodded silently, her soft-soled prison shoes making barely a whisper against the polished concrete. She had said perhaps a dozen words since arriving at Riverside that morning, responding to questions with simple yes or no answers, and maintaining the demeanor of someone who wanted nothing more than to become invisible. "Your cell is 47B, Martinez continued, stopping at a steel door marked with faded numbers. "You'll be sharing with Sandra Williams. She's been here 3 years, keeps to herself, and she'll show you the ropes if you're smart enough to listen." The cell was a cramped 8x10 space, containing 2 narrow bunks, a small metal toilet and a sink that had seen better decades. Sandra Williams, a soft-spoken woman in her 40s serving time for embezzlement, looked up from the book she was reading as Maya entered. "Welcome to paradise," Sandra said with a wry smile. "I'm Sandy. Word of advice, dinner's in an hour, and that's when you'll get your first real look at the social hierarchy around here. Stick close to me and keep quiet." "The sharks can smell fear, and you definitely smell like fear right now." Maya placed her few belongings on the bottom bunk and sat down heavily. For the first time since arriving, she spoke more than a single word. "How bad is it, really?" Sandy marked her place in the book and turned to face her new cellmate. "Depends on how smart you are and how well you can adapt. This place has rules that aren't written in any manual. Carla Rodriguez and her girls control most of what happens here. Who gets the good jobs, who gets protection, who gets hurt. Cross them, and you'll wish you'd never been born. What did you do to stay safe?" "I learned to be useful. I do people's taxes, help with legal documents, handle money transfers for families on the outside. I make myself valuable enough that it's not worth anyone's time to mess with me." Sandy studied Maya's face carefully. "What's your story? What are you in for?" Maya was quiet for so long that Sandy wondered if she was going to answer at all. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Assault. They said I hurt someone." "Did you?" Another long pause. "Yes." The dinner bell echoed through the cell block, followed by the mechanical sound of doors unlocking. Inmates began filing out of their cells and moving toward the cafeteria in a carefully choreographed routine that had been refined over decades of institutional life. "Showtime," Sandy said, standing up. "Remember what I told you. Stay close, stay quiet, and don't make eye contact with anyone who looks like they're looking for trouble." The cafeteria was a cavernous space filled with round metal tables and the constant chatter of 200 women eating from plastic trays. Maya followed Sandy through the food line, accepting a portion of what might charitably be called meatloaf, along with mashed potatoes and green beans that had been cooked into submission. They found seats at a table near the back, where Sandy introduced Maya to 3 other women who, like her, had learned to survive by keeping low profiles and staying useful. The conversation was quiet and cautious, touching on harmless topics like the weather and complaints about the food. That's when Carla Rodriguez decided to make her presence known. She approached their table with the confident swagger of someone who owned everything she surveyed, flanked by 2 equally intimidating women who served as her lieutenants. The cafeteria noise level dropped noticeably as other inmates turned to watch what everyone sensed was about to be a significant moment. "Well, well," Carla said, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet space. "Looks like we have a new little fish who forgot to introduce herself properly." Maya continued eating, her eyes focused on her tray, but Sandy could see the tension in her shoulders. Around them, conversations stopped entirely as the drama unfolded. "I'm talking to you, little girl," Carla continued, moving closer. "In here, new arrivals show respect to those who came before. You don't just walk into my house without paying your respects." Maya slowly lifted her head and made eye contact with Carla for the first time. What the prison bully saw there should have been fear, submission, or at least acknowledgement of her authority. Instead, she saw something that made her own confidence waver for just a moment, a depth of calm that seemed completely out of place in a terrified new inmate. "I don't want any trouble," Maya said quietly. "I just want to do my time and get out." Carla's moment of uncertainty passed, replaced by anger at what she perceived as disrespect. In her world, quiet responses were signs of weakness that needed to be crushed immediately. Trouble found you the moment you walked through those doors without showing proper respect. And now you're going to learn what happens to little girls who don't understand how things work in here. As Carla raised her hand to deliver what she intended to be a humiliating slap that would establish her dominance over the new inmate, Maya Chen made a decision that would change everything anyone thought they knew about the quiet girl in cell 47B. Chapter 2. The reckoning time seemed to slow as Carla Rodriguez's hand arced through the air toward Maya's face. In that suspended moment, every person in the cafeteria held their breath, expecting to witness the brutal establishment of dominance that had played out countless times before in the concrete and steel world of Riverside Women's Correctional. But Maya Chen was not like the other terrified new inmates who had come before. As Carla's hand approached her face, Maya moved with a speed and precision that defied her small stature and quiet demeanor. Her left hand shot up, catching Carla's wrist in an iron grip that stopped the slap cold. Her right hand simultaneously drove forward in a lightning-fast strike to Carla's solar plexus, a blow so perfectly placed and timed that it doubled the larger woman over instantly. Before Carla could even process what was happening, Maya rose from her seat in one fluid motion, her movements controlled and economical. She pivoted on her left foot, using Carla's own momentum against her, and delivered a devastating elbow strike to the back of Carla's neck. The prison bully, who had terrorized inmates for 8 years, crumpled to the cafeteria floor like a marionette with cut strings. The entire sequence took less than 3 seconds. The cafeteria erupted in shocked gasps and whispers as 200 women tried to process what they had just witnessed. Carla Rodriguez, the undisputed queen of violence at Riverside, lay unconscious on the floor while the tiny new inmate stood over her with the same calm expression she had worn since arriving. Carla's 2 lieutenants, Maria Santos and Denise Thompson, both of whom had extensive histories of violence and intimidation, moved to avenge their fallen leader. They had expected an easy target, but now they were facing something they didn't understand. Maria, a stocky woman with arms covered in gang tattoos, rushed Maya from the left, while Denise, tall and wiry with the lean muscle of someone who had spent years fighting for survival, attacked from the right. They had used this pincer movement to overwhelm dozens of victims over the years. Maya didn't retreat or panic. Instead, she stepped forward to meet their attack, closing the distance in a way that disrupted their coordinated assault. As Maria swung a wild haymaker, Maya ducked under the punch and drove her fist into the woman's kidney with surgical precision. Maria screamed and stumbled backward, clutching her side. Denise, seeing her partner falter, pulled a sharpened plastic spoon from her sleeve, a makeshift weapon that could cause serious damage in experienced hands. She lunged forward, aiming for Maya's throat, but found herself grasping empty air as Maya sidestepped the attack with minimal movement. Maya caught Denise's extended arm, used the woman's forward momentum to pull her off balance, and then swept her legs out from under her. Denise hit the concrete floor hard, the improvised weapon skittering away across the polished surface. In less than 10 seconds, 3 of the most feared women in Riverside Women's Correctional were either unconscious or writhing in pain on the cafeteria floor. Maya stood in the center of the chaos, breathing normally, her orange prison uniform barely wrinkled from the encounter. The silence that followed was deafening. Every conversation had stopped, every movement had ceased. 200 women stared at the petite new inmate who had just dismantled the prison's power structure, with the efficiency of a surgeon and the calm of someone who had done this many times before. Officer Martinez was the first to react, rushing into the cafeteria with backup officers, responding to the emergency alert that had been triggered the moment the fight began. She stopped short when she saw the scene. Carla Rodriguez unconscious, her 2 lieutenants incapacitated, and Maya Chen standing calmly beside the wreckage of what had been the prison's established order. "Chen, step away and put your hands where I can see them," Martinez ordered, but her voice carried confusion rather than authority. In 20 years of corrections work, she had never seen anything like what the security cameras had just recorded. Maya raised her hands slowly, making no sudden movements as additional officers secured the scene. "Officer Martinez, I defended myself when I was attacked. I used only the minimum force necessary to stop the threat." The clinical precision of her language was as surprising as her fighting ability. This wasn't the speech pattern of a typical inmate. It sounded more like someone with military or law enforcement training. As paramedics were called to treat Carla and her associates, Martinez escorted Maya to an isolation cell while the incident was investigated. The walk through the corridors was surreal. Every inmate they passed stared with a mixture of awe and fear at the quiet girl who had just rewritten the rules of survival at Riverside. "Chen," Martinez said as they reached the isolation block, "I need to ask you something and I want a straight answer. What kind of training do you have?" Maya was quiet for a moment before responding. "The kind that teaches you to end fights quickly." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I can give you right now." As Maya was locked in the isolation cell, word of the cafeteria incident spread through the prison like wildfire. Inmates who had cowered in fear of Carla Rodriguez for years were trying to process the fact that their tormentor had been defeated by someone who looked like she belonged in a library rather than a maximum security prison. In the infirmary, Carla regained consciousness with a splitting headache and the humiliating knowledge that her reign of terror had ended in less than 3 seconds. When her lieutenants were brought in for treatment, Maria with a bruised kidney and Denise with a concussion from hitting the concrete floor, the full scope of their defeat became clear. "Who is she?" Carla asked the nurse, her voice hoarse and filled with a rage tempered by newfound respect for her opponent's abilities. "Just another inmate," the nurse replied, but both women knew that wasn't true. Maya Chen was something else entirely, and her presence at Riverside was going to change everything about how power and respect were earned in this concrete and steel world. As night fell over the prison, Maya sat alone in her isolation cell, reflecting on the choice she had made. She had come to Riverside hoping to serve her time quietly and invisibly, but violence had found her anyway. Now there was no going back to anonymity. In cell blocks throughout the facility, conversations centered on one question: who was the quiet girl who had taken down Carla Rodriguez, and what other secrets was she hiding behind those calm, dark eyes? The answers to those questions would soon reshape everything the inmates and guards thought they knew about Maya Chen and the circumstances that had brought her to Riverside Women's Correctional Facility. Chapter 3. Revelations Warden. Rebecca Foster had been running Riverside Women's Correctional for 12 years, and in that time she had seen every type of inmate imaginable: career criminals, drug addicts, white-collar embezzlers, and violent offenders, each presenting their own challenges to the delicate ecosystem of prison life. But as she reviewed the security footage of yesterday's cafeteria incident for the 5th time, she knew Maya Chen was unlike anything she had encountered before. "Rewind it to the beginning again," she told Officer Martinez, who sat across from her desk with Maya's file spread between them. The morning sun streamed through the warden's office windows, casting long shadows across the institutional furniture that had witnessed countless difficult conversations. On the monitor, the scene played out with devastating clarity. Maya's response to Carla's attack wasn't the desperate flailing of a frightened woman. It was the controlled, efficient violence of someone with extensive combat training. The precision of her strikes, the way she used her opponent's momentum against them, the tactical assessment that allowed her to neutralize 3 attackers in seconds, none of it belonged in a civilian prison. "Martinez, what do we actually know about Chen's background?" Warden Foster asked, closing the video player and turning her attention to the thin file on her desk. "That's the problem, Warden. Her file is surprisingly sparse." Martinez pulled out the official documents. Maya Chen, 25 years old, born in San Francisco to immigrant parents. convicted of aggravated assault after an incident at a bar in downtown Sacramento 6 months ago. Sentenced to 3 to 5 years. No prior criminal record, no known gang affiliations, no family visits scheduled. What about the assault case? Who did she attack and why? Martinez flipped through several pages before finding the police report. This is where it gets interesting. Chen was at Murphy's Tavern when 3 men allegedly attempted to assault a female college student in the parking lot. According to witnesses, Chen intervened and Martinez paused, rereading the report. And what? Warden, she put all 3 men in the hospital. One suffered a broken jaw, another had a dislocated shoulder, and the third required surgery for internal injuries. The prosecutor argued that her response was disproportionate to the threat. Warden Foster leaned back in her chair, processing the information. So we have a woman with no criminal history who severely injured 3 men while defending a stranger, and who just dismantled our most violent inmates with techniques that suggest professional training. Martinez, I think we need to dig deeper into Ms. Chen's background. 2 hours later, Warden Foster found herself on a secure phone call with Colonel James Harrison from the U.S. Army Criminal Investigation Command. After being transferred through 3 different departments and providing extensive verification of her credentials, she finally reached someone willing to discuss Maya Chen's military record. Warden Foster, Colonel Harrison said, his voice carrying the weight of classified information. I can confirm that Maya Chen served in the U.S. Army, but the details of her service are complicated. Complicated how? Chen was part of a specialized unit that conducted operations I cannot discuss over an unsecured line. What I can tell you is that she was honorably discharged after completing multiple overseas deployments, and her service record includes commendations for valor under fire. Warden Foster felt a chill. Colonel, are you telling me that one of my inmates is a decorated combat veteran? I'm telling you that Maya Chen possesses skills and training that make her potentially dangerous in a confined environment. However, I'm also telling you that her psychological profile suggests someone with strong moral convictions who only uses violence as a last resort. Then why didn't any of this information appear in her pre-sentencing report? Colonel Harrison was quiet for a moment. Sometimes, Warden, people prefer to start over without the weight of their past defining them. Chen requested that her military service not be part of her civilian legal proceedings. She wanted to be judged as Maya Chen the citizen, not Staff Sergeant Chen the soldier. After ending the call, Warden Foster sat alone in her office, staring at Maya's file and wondering how many other secrets the quiet young woman was carrying. The decision she made next would determine whether Maya's time at Riverside would be defined by violence or redemption. Meanwhile, in the isolation block, Maya sat on her narrow bunk, reading a paperback novel that Officer Martinez had allowed her to keep. The silence of solitary confinement was a stark contrast to the constant noise of the general population, and Maya found herself appreciating the peace even as she understood the political complexity of her situation. The sound of approaching footsteps broke her concentration. Officer Martinez appeared at her cell door, followed by Warden Foster, whose presence in the isolation block was unusual enough to signal something significant. Chen, the warden would like to speak with you, Martinez said, unlocking the cell door. Maya stood and faced Warden Foster with the same calm demeanor she had maintained since arriving at Riverside. Ma'am, Ms. Chen, I think it's time we had an honest conversation about who you are and what you're doing in my prison. Warden Foster studied Maya's face, looking for any sign of the combat veteran she now knew existed beneath the quiet exterior. I'm serving my sentence for assault, ma'am. Nothing more complicated than that. Staff Sergeant Maya Chen, 75th Ranger Regiment, 3 combat deployments, Purple Heart recipient, honorably discharged. Warden Foster watched Maya's expression carefully as she recited the information Colonel Harrison had cleared her to know. For the first time since arriving at Riverside, Maya's composed mask slipped slightly. The mention of her military service brought a flash of something, pain, regret, or perhaps relief that her secret was finally out. That was a different life, Mum. Was it? Because yesterday in my cafeteria, I saw Staff Sergeant Chen, not Maya the civilian. The way you moved, the precision of your response, the tactical assessment, that wasn't something you learned in a self-defense class. Maya sat back down on her bunk, seemingly weighing how much truth she was willing to share. Warden Foster, I came here hoping to serve my time quietly and start over when I get out. I never wanted to use those skills again. But you did use them. When you saw someone being threatened, you responded the way you were trained to respond. You neutralized the threat with minimal collateral damage. Warden Foster's voice softened slightly. Maya, what happened in that bar in Sacramento wasn't about excessive force. It was about a soldier who couldn't watch innocent people get hurt. Maya's composure finally cracked and tears began flowing down her cheeks. Those 3 men were going to rape that girl. I could see it in their eyes, hear it in their voices. And for a moment, I wasn't in a parking lot in Sacramento. I was back in Afghanistan trying to save people who couldn't save themselves. Warden Foster understood now. Maya Chen wasn't a criminal who happened to have military training. She was a war veteran struggling with the transition back to civilian life, someone whose moral convictions and combat skills had collided in a moment of crisis. Maya, I'm going to offer you something that hasn't been offered to an inmate in this facility before. I want you to consider helping us reform how we handle violence and conflict resolution in this prison. Your skills, properly channeled, could save lives and create a safer environment for everyone. Maya looked up, confusion evident in her expression. I don't understand. I'm proposing that you help us train both inmates and staff in de-escalation techniques and personal safety. Not to create fighters, but to create people who can protect themselves and others without causing unnecessary harm. For the first time in months, Maya smiled. You want me to teach people how to fight? I want you to teach people how to survive. There's a difference, and I think you know that better than anyone. As Warden Foster left the isolation block, she realized she had just made a decision that would either revolutionize Riverside Women's Correctional or create the most dangerous program in the state's prison system. But watching Maya's transformation from defeated criminal to purposeful teacher, she knew she had made the right choice. Maya Chen's journey from combat veteran to convicted felon to unlikely mentor was about to begin, and it would change not just her own life, but the lives of everyone around her. Chapter 4. The Teacher Emerges. 3 weeks after the cafeteria incident, Maya stood in front of 15 women in the prison's multi-purpose room, a space that had been hastily converted into a training facility. The program that Warden Foster had proposed was now reality, though not without significant opposition from both inmates and staff, who questioned the wisdom of teaching combat techniques to convicted felons. Before we begin, Maya said, her voice carrying the authority she had developed during years of training soldiers, I want to be clear about what this program is and what it isn't. This isn't about learning to hurt people. It's about learning to protect yourself and others while using the minimum force necessary. The women sitting on folding chairs before her represented a cross-section of Riverside's population. There was Sandra Williams, her cellmate, who had volunteered immediately. Angela Torres, a young woman serving time for drug possession, who had been repeatedly victimized by stronger inmates. Even Maria Santos, one of Carla Rodriguez's former lieutenants, had requested to join after witnessing Maya's skills firsthand. Carla herself was conspicuously absent, currently serving time in solitary confinement for her role in initiating the cafeteria violence. But her influence over the prison's social dynamics had been permanently shattered by Maya's demonstration of superior skill. The first principle, Maya continued, moving to the center of the room, is awareness. Most violence in prison happens because people don't see the warning signs. They don't recognize when a situation is escalating, and they don't position themselves to avoid or de-escalate conflicts. Officer Martinez watched from the corner of the room, still uncertain about the program, but impressed by Maya's transformation from quiet inmate to confident instructor. The woman teaching these classes bore little resemblance to the terrified-looking person who had arrived at Riverside a month ago. Angela, Maya called to the young woman in the front row, tell me about the last time someone threatened you here. Angela shifted uncomfortably, glancing around at the other women. It was 2 weeks ago. I was in the laundry room, and this woman I'd never seen before started saying I owed her money for protection. She got really close to me, backing me against the washing machines. What did you do? I gave her what money I had and avoided the laundry room for a week. Maya nodded. That was probably smart in the moment. Avoiding immediate violence is always preferable, but let's analyze what happened. Angela, describe the woman's body language when she approached you. She was aggressive, standing really close, using her height to intimidate me. She kept pointing her finger at my chest. Perfect observation. She was using her physical presence as a weapon. Now, Sandra, if you were in Angela's position, what could you do differently? Sandra thought for a moment. Change your position so you're not trapped against the machines. Create distance. Exactly. Physical positioning is often more important than fighting ability. If Angela had moved toward the center of the room, she would have had escape routes and witnesses. The intimidation tactic only works if you allow yourself to be cornered. Maya spent the next hour teaching the women basic awareness techniques, how to read body language, recognize threat escalation, and position themselves to avoid becoming victims. It was material she had taught to soldiers preparing for deployment, adapted for the unique environment of a women's prison. Now, Maya said as the session progressed, there are times when awareness and positioning aren't enough. Sometimes you have to defend yourself, but there's a right way and a wrong way to do that. She called Angela forward to demonstrate. Angela, grab my wrist like you're trying to stop me from leaving. Angela hesitantly took hold of Maya's right wrist. Without any apparent effort, Maya twisted her arm in a small circle, breaking the grip and simultaneously moving to a position where she could control Angela's movement. The key isn't strength. It's understanding leverage and anatomy. Angela is stronger than she looks, but technique beats strength every time. Maya demonstrated the movement again slowly, showing how minimal force applied in the right direction could overcome a larger opponent. But here's the most important part, Maya continued, helping Angela practice the technique. Once you've broken free, your goal is to escape, not to continue fighting. Violence should always be your last option, and when you do use it, it should be brief and focused on creating an opportunity to get away. Maria Santos raised her hand. Maya, what about when running isn't an option? What if someone corners you in your cell? Maya appreciated the question because it addressed the reality of prison life. That's when you need to think tactically. In a confined space, you have two advantages. Your attacker can't use their full range of motion, and you know the layout better than they do. Show me how someone would attack you in a cell. Maria stood and moved toward Maya with her hands extended, simulating someone trying to grab her. Maya stepped to the side, used Maria's forward momentum to guide her past, and then moved to the cell door, the escape route. In that situation, my goal wasn't to fight Maria. It was to get to the door. If someone attacks you in your cell, they're expecting you to back up against the wall where they can trap you. Instead, you move toward the exit. Officer Martinez found herself taking notes as Maya continued the lesson. The techniques being taught weren't aggressive martial arts moves designed to injure opponents. They were tactical responses focused on escape and survival. As the session ended, Maya addressed the group one final time. Remember, everything we're learning here is about giving you choices. When someone threatens you, you can choose to comply, you can choose to escape, or you can choose to defend yourself. But whatever you choose, it should be a decision, not a reaction based on fear or anger. After the women filed out, Officer Martinez approached Maya. I have to admit, when the warden first proposed this program, I thought it was crazy. Teaching fighting techniques to inmates seemed like a recipe for disaster. Maya began stacking the folding chairs, her movements efficient and purposeful. Officer Martinez, these women were already fighting. They were just doing it badly, getting hurt unnecessarily, and creating more violence than needed to resolve conflicts. All I'm doing is teaching them to be smart about it. Is that what your military training taught you? To be smart about violence? Maya paused in her chair stacking, considering the question. The military taught me that violence is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used skillfully or clumsily. Used skillfully, it ends conflicts quickly with minimal harm. Used clumsily, it creates more problems than it solves. And the bar incident in Sacramento, was that skillful use of violence? Maya's expression grew distant. Those 3 men were going to seriously hurt that girl. In that moment, I had to choose between letting it happen or stopping it. I chose to stop it, and I used the minimum force necessary to do that. 3 men in the hospital doesn't sound like minimum force. Officer Martinez, if I had wanted to kill those men, they would be dead. If I had wanted to permanently disable them, they would never walk again. Instead, they spent a few weeks in the hospital, and then went home to think about their life choices. That's proportional response. As Maya finished cleaning up the training area, Officer Martinez realized that the quiet woman who had arrived at Riverside a month ago was revealing herself to be someone far more complex than anyone had imagined. Maya Chen wasn't just a skilled fighter, she was a tactical thinker who understood the moral weight of violence and used it only when necessary to protect others. The question was whether the other inmates would learn those same principles, or whether Maya's training would simply create more efficient predators in the concrete jungle of Riverside Women's Correctional Facility. Chapter 5. The Test of Leadership. 2 months into Maya's self-defense program, Riverside Women's Correctional had transformed in ways that both impressed and concerned the administration. Violence in the general population had decreased by 60%, but the nature of conflicts had become more complex. Instead of random brutality, disputes were now being resolved through calculated confrontations where both sides understood the rules of engagement Maya had taught them. The change was most evident in the prison's social hierarchy. Carla Rodriguez's reign of terror had ended not just because of her defeat, but because Maya had taught other inmates that they didn't have to submit to intimidation. Women who had cowered in fear for years were now walking with confidence, knowing they possessed the skills to protect themselves, but not everyone appreciated the new order. "So this is bullshit," muttered Denise Thompson as she sat in the recreation room with 3 other inmates who had benefited from the old system of fear and exploitation. "Used to be. You knew where you stood in this place. Strong women ran things. Weak women stayed in line. Now everybody thinks they're a fucking martial arts expert." Jackie Morrison, a lifer serving time for second-degree murder, nodded in agreement. "That Chinese girl has turned this place upside down. Used to be simple. You paid your taxes to the right people, showed respect, and you got protection. Now these bitches think they don't need protection because they can throw a few punches." The group was planning what they called a reality check for Maya's students, a coordinated effort to prove that combat training meant nothing against superior numbers and ruthless tactics. They had identified Angela Torres as their first target, reasoning that defeating one of Maya's most visible success stories would discourage other inmates from embracing the new philosophy. Angela had indeed transformed since joining Maya's program. The young woman who had once been victimized weakly was now confident and alert, no longer an easy target for predators. But Jackie and her crew believed that confidence was just an illusion that needed to be shattered. Their opportunity came during evening recreation time, when Angela was alone in the library reading a legal textbook. The library was a quiet space with limited visibility from the guard stations, making it perfect for the kind of lesson Jackie had in mind. "Hey, little lawyer girl," Jackie said as she entered the library with her 3 associates. "I hear you think you're tough now because Maya taught you some moves." Angela looked up from her book, immediately recognizing the threat but not panicking. Maya's training had taught her to assess situations calmly and look for advantages rather than react with fear. "I don't want any trouble, Jackie," Angela said, but she also closed her book and shifted her position to face the approaching women. Maya had taught her never to allow potential attackers to approach from her blind side. "That's the problem with you new bitches," Denise said, moving to Angela's left while Jackie approached from the front. "You think not wanting trouble means you won't get trouble. But this place don't work that way." Angela noticed that Jackie's crew was positioning themselves to surround her, exactly as Maya had warned during training sessions. Instead of staying seated and allowing herself to be trapped, Angela stood and moved toward the library's main aisle, creating distance and positioning herself closer to the exit. "Smart girl," Jackie acknowledged, pulling a sharpened plastic comb from her sleeve, "but not smart enough." What happened next would become legendary in Riverside's inmate folklore. Angela didn't panic or attempt to fight 4 women simultaneously. Instead, she did exactly what Maya had trained her to do. She created chaos that worked to her advantage. Angela grabbed the heavy legal textbook she had been reading and hurled it at the overhead light fixture, plunging the library into near darkness. In the confusion that followed, she used her knowledge of the library's layout to evade Jackie's crew, while making enough noise to attract the attention of nearby guards. When the emergency lighting activated 30 seconds later, guards found Jackie and her associates stumbling around in confusion, while Angela stood calmly by the library entrance, completely unharmed. "What happened here?" Officer Martinez demanded, as backup officers secured the scene. "These women attempted to assault me," Angela replied with a composure that would have been impossible before Maya's training. "I defended myself by disrupting their attack and withdrawing to a safe position." The incident report that followed documented not just the failed assault, but the tactical thinking that had allowed one woman to defeat 4 attackers without throwing a single punch. Maya's program wasn't just teaching physical techniques, it was teaching strategic thinking. Word of Angela's successful defense spread through the prison within hours, but the reaction was mixed. While many inmates celebrated the victory, others began to worry about what Maya's influence was creating. "We need to talk," Sandra Williams told Maya during their evening cell time. "The old guard is getting desperate, and that makes them dangerous. Jackie's crew isn't going to give up just because Angela embarrassed them." Maya looked up from the journal where she recorded observations about her students' progress. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that your program has created a situation where the old predators feel threatened. They're going to escalate until someone gets seriously hurt." Sandra's voice carried genuine concern. "Maya, you've given these women tools to protect themselves, but you've also painted a target on your back. The people who profited from the old system want their power back." Maya understood the complexity of what she had set in motion. By empowering potential victims, she had inevitably threatened those who had gained power through victimization. It was a classic dynamic that she had observed in military operations overseas. When you change the balance of power, those who had benefited from the old balance would fight to restore it. "Sandra, do you think I should stop the program? Let things go back to the way they were?" "God, no. What you've done here is incredible. Women who were terrified 6 months ago are now walking with their heads up. The violence rate has dropped. Conflicts are being resolved without serious injuries and people feel safer." Sandra paused, choosing her words carefully. "But I think you need to prepare for a more serious challenge. The old guard is going to come after you directly, and they're not going to fight fair." That night, as Maya lay on her narrow bunk, listening to the sounds of the prison settling into its evening routine, she reflected on the path that had brought her to this point. 6 months ago, she had been a broken combat veteran, trying to disappear into anonymity. Now she was a teacher and protector, whose influence was reshaping an entire institution. The question was whether she was prepared for the war that was coming. Because Jackie Morrison and her allies weren't just planning another intimidation attempt, they were planning something that would either restore the old order or destroy Maya's influence permanently. In her cell 3 blocks away, Jackie Morrison was having a similar conversation with her crew. "That library thing was just a preview," she told them. "If we want to fix this situation, we need to go after the source. Maya Chen thinks she's some kind of savior, but she's just another inmate who can bleed like anyone else." The battle for the soul of Riverside Women's Correctional was about to begin, and both sides understood that only one philosophy would survive. Chapter 6: The Final Confrontation. The attack came during the weekly movie night in the recreation hall, when security was minimal and nearly 200 inmates were gathered in a darkened space watching an old action film on the prison's outdated projection system. Jackie Morrison had spent 2 weeks planning the assault, recruiting allies from among the inmates who missed the predictable brutality of the old system. Maya sat in the middle section with several of her program participants, including Angela Torres and Sandra Williams. She had sensed tension building over the past week, whispered conversations that stopped when she approached, meaningful glances between certain inmates, and a general atmosphere that reminded her of the calm before combat operations. 20 minutes into the movie, during a particularly loud action sequence, Jackie and 8 other women moved simultaneously. The plan was simple and vicious: surround Maya in the darkness, overwhelm her with superior numbers, and beat her severely enough to destroy her credibility and end her influence over the prison's social dynamics. What Jackie hadn't anticipated was that Maya's students had also been watching for signs of trouble. Angela Torres was the first to notice the coordinated movement of Jackie's crew, and she immediately alerted Sandra Williams with a subtle hand signal that Maya had taught them. "Contact front," Sandra whispered, using military terminology that Maya had shared during training sessions. Maya's response was immediate, but measured. Instead of panicking or preparing for a fight, she assessed the situation tactically. 8 attackers, in a crowded, darkened room with limited escape routes and innocent bystanders who could be hurt in a chaotic brawl. "Everyone stay calm," Maya said quietly to her nearby students. "Move toward the exits slowly and get clear of the area." But Jackie's crew was already too close, and retreat was no longer an option. "Time to show this place what happens to bitches who think they're special," Jackie snarled as she swung a sock filled with soap bars at Maya's head. Maya ducked under the makeshift weapon and immediately understood that this wasn't going to be a simple intimidation attempt. Jackie and her allies were armed with improvised weapons and positioned to cause serious harm. The rules of engagement had just changed from conflict resolution to survival. What followed was a masterclass in tactical combat that would be discussed in law enforcement and military training circles for years to come. Maya moved with the controlled violence of someone who had survived multiple combat deployments, but her focus wasn't on destroying her attackers. It was on protecting the innocent women around her, while neutralizing the threats with minimal collateral damage. As Jackie swung the weapon again, Maya caught her wrist, twisted it to disarm her, and used Jackie's own momentum to send her crashing into a row of empty chairs. The improvised weapon flew across the room, harmlessly out of reach. Denise Thompson rushed Maya from the left with a sharpened plastic knife, but Maya sidestepped the attack and delivered a precise strike to Denise's elbow that caused her to drop the weapon while crying out in pain. The other 6 attackers converged simultaneously, expecting to overwhelm Maya through sheer numbers. Instead, they found themselves facing someone who had been trained to fight multiple opponents in life-or-death situations. Maya used the attackers' own aggression against them, redirecting their momentum to cause them to collide with each other. She struck with surgical precision, targeting pressure points and nerve clusters that would incapacitate without causing permanent injury. Within 90 seconds, 8 women lay groaning on the recreation hall floor, while Maya stood in their midst, breathing normally and completely uninjured. The entire confrontation had been witnessed by nearly 200 inmates and recorded by the prison's security cameras. But what impressed the observers most wasn't Maya's fighting ability, it was her restraint. Despite being attacked by 8 armed women, she had used only the minimum force necessary to defend herself and protect others. Emergency lights flooded the recreation hall as guards responded to the disturbance. Warden Foster arrived within minutes, surveying the scene with a mixture of amazement and concern. "Chen, are you injured?" she asked. "No, ma'am. I defended myself and ensured the safety of other inmates who could have been hurt in the conflict." Warden Foster looked at the 8 women being treated by medical staff for various non-life-threatening injuries. "Ms. Chen, you understand that this incident will need to be thoroughly investigated?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm prepared to cooperate fully with any investigation." As the injured attackers were escorted to the infirmary and the recreation hall was secured as a crime scene, word of Maya's second demonstration of combat supremacy spread through Riverside like wildfire. But this time, the reaction was different from the cafeteria incident months earlier. Instead of shocked whispers about Maya's unexpected abilities, the conversations focused on how she had protected innocent inmates while refusing to seriously injure her attackers. Women who had witnessed the confrontation described how Maya had positioned herself to shield others from harm and how she had used only the force necessary to end the threat. "She could have killed them," Angela Torres told a group of inmates in the cafeteria the next morning. 8 women with weapons, and Maya could have destroyed them permanently, but she didn't. She stopped the threat and then stopped fighting. That's what she's been trying to teach us. That strength isn't about hurting people, it's about protecting them. The investigation that followed was thorough and conclusive. Security footage confirmed that Maya had been attacked by 8 inmates with improvised weapons and had defended herself with appropriate force. Jackie Morrison and her crew were charged with assault with deadly weapons and faced additional years added to their sentences. But the more significant outcome was the transformation of Maya's role within the prison community. She was no longer seen as just a skilled fighter or an effective teacher. She was viewed as a protector who would use her abilities to shield others from harm. Warden Foster called Maya to her office 3 days after the incident. "Ms. Chen, I've received a rather unusual request from the State Corrections Department. They want you to develop a formal training program that can be implemented in other facilities." Maya looked surprised. "Ma'am, what you've accomplished here at Riverside has attracted attention at the highest levels of the corrections system. Violence is down, inmate confidence is up, and you've proven that teaching tactical thinking and self-defense can actually make prisons safer rather than more dangerous. I'm honored by the opportunity, ma'am, but I'm still an inmate with 2 years left on my sentence." Warden Foster smiled. "Actually, the parole board has agreed to review your case early based on your exceptional contributions to prison safety and inmate rehabilitation. Ms. Chen, you've turned your combat skills into tools for healing and protection. That's exactly the kind of transformation our system is supposed to encourage." 6 months later, Maya stood outside the gates of Riverside Women's Correctional as a free woman. In her hand was a contract to develop self-defense and conflict resolution programs for the State Corrections Department. Behind her were dozens of women whose lives had been changed by her teaching and protection. As she walked toward the bus that would take her back to the civilian world, Maya reflected on the journey that had brought her from broken combat veteran to convicted felon to unlikely teacher and protector. She had learned that strength wasn't about the ability to hurt others. It was about the wisdom to know when and how to use force to protect the innocent. The quiet girl who had arrived at Riverside hoping to disappear had instead found her purpose as a teacher and guardian. And in teaching others to protect themselves, she had finally learned to forgive herself for the choices that had brought her to prison in the first place. Maya Chen's war was finally over. Her mission as a protector and teacher was just beginning. Chapter 7. A New Mission. 6 months after her release from Riverside, Maya Chen stood in front of a conference room filled with wardens, correctional officers, and state officials at the California Department of Corrections headquarters in Sacramento. The sterile corporate environment was a stark contrast to the concrete and steel world she had left behind, but Maya felt more at home here than she had anywhere since returning from her final military deployment. The traditional approach to prison violence has been reactive, Maya explained, advancing to the next slide of her presentation. We wait for incidents to occur, then respond with punishment and isolation. What we've proven at Riverside is that a proactive approach, teaching tactical thinking and defensive skills, actually reduces violence while empowering inmates to protect themselves and others. Warden Margaret Collins from Pelican Bay State Prison raised her hand. Ms. Chen, I appreciate the results you achieved at Riverside, but Pelican Bay houses some of the most violent offenders in the state. Teaching combat techniques to lifers and gang members seems like a recipe for disaster. Maya had anticipated this concern. Warden Collins, I understand your reservations, but consider this, your most violent inmates already know how to fight. They're already using those skills to victimize others. What we're proposing is teaching defensive tactics to their potential victims while simultaneously changing the culture around violence. She clicked to a slide showing statistical data from Riverside. In the 18 months since the program began, violent incidents have dropped by 73%. More importantly, when conflicts do occur, they're resolved quickly with minimal injury because participants understand principles of proportional response and de-escalation. Deputy Director James Walsh, a 20-year veteran of Corrections Administration, leaned forward in his chair. Ms. Chen, what you accomplished at Riverside is impressive, but Riverside is a minimum to medium security women's facility. The dynamics in maximum security men's prisons are entirely different. You're absolutely right, sir, which is why I'm not proposing a one-size-fits-all program. Maya moved to the next slide, which outlined different approaches for different security levels and populations. For maximum security facilities, we focus primarily on de-escalation techniques and situational awareness. For medium security, we add basic defensive skills. For minimum security, we include leadership training and conflict mediation. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the state's chief psychologist for corrections, spoke up. Ms. Chen, there's a philosophical question here that concerns me. Are we teaching inmates to solve problems through violence, even if it's defensive violence? Maya paused, recognizing the deeper ethical question behind Dr. Martinez's concern. Dr. Martinez, I spent 3 combat deployments overseas before coming to prison. I learned that violence is sometimes unavoidable, but it should always be purposeful, proportional, and protective, rather than predatory. She clicked to a new slide showing photographs of some of her former students at Riverside. Angela Torres was victimized weekly before the program. Now she's completing her paralegal certification and helping other inmates with legal issues. Sandra Williams became a conflict mediator who resolves disputes before they escalate to violence. Maria Santos, who was part of the original gang that attacked me, is now teaching literacy classes to other inmates. The point isn't to create fighters, Maya continued. It's to create people who understand that they have choices when faced with conflict. Choice leads to empowerment, and empowerment leads to positive behavioral change. After the presentation, Maya was approached by Colonel Patricia Hayes from the California National Guard. Ms. Chen, I've reviewed your military service record. Your commanding officers spoke very highly of your leadership abilities and your commitment to protecting others. Thank you, ma'am. I'm curious about something. What made you decide to focus on corrections rather than returning to military or law enforcement work? Maya considered the question carefully. Colonel, in the military, I was trained to neutralize threats to protect innocent people. In prison, I discovered that many of the people society labels as threats are actually victims who were never taught how to protect themselves. The mission is the same, protecting innocence, but the approach is different. And the bar incident that led to your conviction? Was me trying to apply military solutions to civilian problems. I learned that there's a difference between being a warrior and being a protector. Warriors destroy enemies. Protectors empower people to defend themselves. The state approved Maya's program for a pilot implementation in 3 facilities: a women's medium security prison, a men's minimum security facility, and a juvenile detention center. Each location would test different aspects of her approach while providing data on effectiveness across diverse populations. Maya's first assignment was Valley State Prison for Women, a facility with a reputation for violence and gang activity that made Riverside look peaceful by comparison. As she walked through the gates for her first day as a civilian instructor, Maya felt the familiar tension of entering a hostile environment. But this time, she was coming as a teacher rather than an inmate. "Ms. Chen," said Warden Robert Kim as he escorted her through the facility, "I'll be honest with you, my staff is skeptical about this program. We've had 2 stabbings and 3 serious assaults in the past month alone. Some of my officers think teaching these women to fight is going to make the situation worse." Maya nodded, understanding the concern. "Warden Kim, may I observe one of these recent incidents on security footage? I'd like to understand the specific dynamics we're dealing with here." In the security office, Maya watched video of the most recent assault, a coordinated attack by 3 gang members against a new inmate who had refused to hand over her commissary money. The attack was brutal and efficient, leaving the victim with a broken nose and fractured ribs. "Warden, what happened to the attackers?" 30 days in solitary and loss of privileges. "And the victim?" "Hospital for 3 days, then protective custody." Maya studied the footage again, analyzing the tactical elements of the attack. "Sir, with your permission, I'd like to use this incident as a case study in my first class. The victim made several positioning errors that made her vulnerable, and the attackers used techniques that could have been countered with proper training. You think you can teach someone to defend against 3 attackers? I think I can teach someone to avoid being trapped in a situation where 3 attackers can corner them. Sometimes the best fighting technique is not being there when the fight starts." Maya's first class at Valley State included 25 women, ranging from gang members to white-collar criminals to women serving time for domestic violence charges. The diversity of backgrounds and motivations created a complex dynamic that would test every technique Maya had developed. "Before we begin," Maya announced to the group, "I want to establish some ground rules. This program is voluntary. Anyone can leave at any time. What we learn here stays here. And most importantly, the goal is to reduce violence, not increase it." A heavily tattooed woman named Rosa Gutierrez raised her hand. "Lady, I've been fighting since I was 12 years old. What can you teach me that I don't already know?" Maya smiled. "Rosa, you obviously know how to hurt people. The question is, do you know how to protect people? Because there's a difference between being good at violence and being good at defense." "What's the difference?" "Violence is about defeating an opponent. Defense is about preserving life, yours and theirs. Violence escalates conflicts. Defense resolves them." Maya moved to the center of the room. "Rosa, would you be willing to demonstrate your fighting technique?" Rosa stood up eagerly, clearly confident in her abilities. "Sure. How do you want to do this?" "Attack me however you think would be most effective." Rosa approached with the practiced aggression of someone who had won many fights through intimidation and superior technique. She was faster and stronger than Carla Rodriguez had been, with the refined skills of someone who had survived years of street and prison violence. But Maya didn't fight Rosa. She simply redirected the woman's aggression in a way that left Rosa on the ground without being injured or humiliated. "Rosa, you're an excellent fighter," Maya said, helping her up. "But fighting and defense are different skills with different objectives. You fought to defeat me. I defended to end the conflict safely." Rosa dusted herself off, her expression thoughtful rather than angry. "Show me how you did that." As Maya began teaching the women of Valley State Prison, The same principles she had developed at Riverside, she realized that her mission had evolved beyond simply helping individual inmates. She was developing a philosophy of protective strength that could transform how society approached conflict resolution and personal safety. The question was whether that philosophy could survive the challenges that lay ahead. Chapter 8. Legacy of Strength. 2 years after beginning her work with the California Department of Corrections, Maya Chen sat in her small apartment in Sacramento, reviewing reports from the 12 facilities now implementing variations of her defensive training program. The results were remarkable. Violent incidents had decreased by an average of 68% across all participating prisons, while inmate confidence and participation in rehabilitation programs had increased significantly. But Maya's proudest moment came in the form of a letter that arrived on a Tuesday morning, written in the careful handwriting she recognized immediately. Dear Maya, I hope this letter finds you well. I wanted you to know that I was granted parole last week after serving 6 years at Riverside. The parole board specifically mentioned my role in peer conflict resolution and my participation in your self-defense program as factors in their decision. More importantly, I wanted you to know what happened yesterday. I was walking home from my new job at a community center when 3 men tried to rob me in the parking lot. 2 years ago, I would have panicked and become a victim. Instead, I remembered everything you taught us about awareness, positioning, and defensive thinking. I didn't have to fight them, Maya. I recognized the setup before they could corner me, created distance, and made enough noise to attract attention. They ran off without getting anything, and I wasn't hurt. Your training didn't just teach me to defend myself. It taught me to think like someone who deserves to be safe. I start college next month studying social work. My goal is to work with at-risk women and teach them the same principles you taught us. You saved my life in that prison, Maya. But more than that, you taught me that I was worth saving. Forever grateful, Angela Torres Maya set the letter down and wiped away tears she hadn't expected. In the 2 years since her release, she had received dozens of similar letters from former inmates whose lives had been changed by her program. But Angela's letter captured something that made all the challenges and criticisms worthwhile. Her phone rang, interrupting her reflection. The caller ID showed Dr. Sarah Martinez from the State Corrections Department. Maya, I hope you're sitting down. I have news that's going to change everything. What kind of news? The Federal Bureau of Prisons wants to implement your program nationwide. They're offering you a position as Director of Defensive Training and Conflict Resolution for the entire federal prison system. Maya felt her breath catch. A federal position would mean the opportunity to impact thousands of inmates across the country, but it would also mean leaving behind the personal connections she had built in California. Dr. Martinez, that's overwhelming. What would that position entail? You'd be based in Washington, D.C. With a team of instructors working under you. You'd develop standardized curricula for different security levels, train other instructors, and oversee implementation in over 100 federal facilities. Maya, this could affect the lives of hundreds of thousands of inmates. That evening, Maya sat in her car outside Valley State Prison, watching the sun set behind the razor wire and concrete walls that had become such a familiar part of her landscape. Inside those walls were women she had taught to protect themselves and others, women who were now teaching those same principles to newer inmates. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Sandra Williams, who had been released 6 months earlier. Maya saw the news about the federal job offer online. You have to take it. What you started here needs to spread everywhere. Another message came from Maria Santos. Girl, you better take that job. Think about how many women you could help. We'll be fine here. You taught us well enough to keep teaching each other. Maya realized that her former students were right. The program had grown beyond her personal involvement. At Valley State, former gang members were now teaching conflict resolution. Women who had been victims were now mentors to other potential victims. The philosophy of protective strength had taken root and was spreading organically. A week later, Maya stood in the office of the Federal Bureau of Prisons Director in Washington, D.C., reviewing the scope of her new responsibilities. The federal system housed over 150,000 inmates in facilities ranging from minimum security camps to maximum security penitentiaries. The challenge was enormous, but so was the potential impact. Ms. Chen, Director Wilson explained, we want you to start with pilot programs in 10 facilities, 2 at each security level. If the results match what you achieved in California, We'll begin full implementation within 2 years. Maya's first federal assignment was USP Atlanta, a medium-security men's facility with a reputation for violence and gang activity. Walking through the gates as the new director of defensive training felt surreal. 3 years earlier, she had been an inmate herself, and now she was developing policy for the entire federal prison system. The initial resistance from both inmates and staff was intense. Male inmates questioned whether a woman could teach them anything about fighting. Guards worried that combat training would make dangerous prisoners even more dangerous. Gang leaders saw the program as a threat to their control over weaker inmates, but Maya had learned from her experiences in California. She began not with physical techniques, but with philosophical discussions about the difference between predatory violence and protective strength. "Most of you already know how to hurt people," she told her first class of 20 male inmates. "What I'm here to teach you is how to protect people, including yourselves, without causing unnecessary harm." A heavily muscled man named Marcus Thompson, serving time for armed robbery, laughed dismissively. "Lady, you don't understand how things work in here. It's kill or be killed. Showing weakness gets you hurt or worse." Maya nodded. "Marcus, you're right that showing weakness is dangerous, but there's a difference between being weak and choosing restraint. One comes from fear, the other comes from strength." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means that truly strong people don't need to prove their strength by hurting others. They prove it by protecting others." Maya moved to the center of the room. "Marcus, would you be willing to help me demonstrate something?" Marcus stood up, clearly confident in his ability to handle a woman half his size. "Sure. What do you want me to do?" "Try to intimidate me the way you would intimidate someone you wanted to control." Marcus approached with the aggressive posture of someone accustomed to using his size and presence as weapons. But as he moved closer, Maya shifted her positioning in subtle ways that changed the entire dynamic of the interaction. "Notice what just happened," Maya said to the class. "Marcus tried to use his physical presence to control the space, but I maintained my position and my options. I didn't back down, but I also didn't escalate the confrontation." She spent the next hour teaching the men the same principles she had taught the women in California: awareness, positioning, de-escalation, and defensive thinking. But she adapted the lessons to the unique dynamics of male prison culture, where challenges to authority were often met with immediate violence. "In here you think respect comes from being feared," Maya explained. "But fear-based respect is fragile. It only lasts as long as you can maintain your reputation through violence. Real respect comes from being someone others can trust to do the right thing, even when it's difficult." Over the following months, Maya's program began to transform USP Atlanta in the same way it had transformed the women's facilities in California. Violence decreased, but more importantly, the nature of conflicts changed. Disputes that once would have escalated to serious violence were now being resolved through mediation and mutual respect. The success at USP Atlanta led to rapid expansion of the program throughout the federal system. Maya found herself traveling constantly, training instructors and adapting curricula for different populations and security levels. But her most meaningful moment came during a visit to Riverside Women's Correctional, where she had started this journey as a broken inmate seeking anonymity. "Maya!" Angela Torres called out as Maya entered the visitor's room. Angela was now a junior at Sacramento State University, studying social work and volunteering at a crisis center for women. "Look at you," Maya said, embracing her former student. "I heard you made the dean's list." "I also heard you're changing prisons all across the country. Maya, do you realize what you've accomplished?" Maya looked through the visitor's room windows at the yard where she had once walked as a prisoner. "Angela, what I've accomplished is learning that strength isn't about what you can destroy. It's about what you can protect and build." "Is that what you tell people when they ask about your story?" Maya smiled. "I tell them that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with wisdom, and that the strongest people are those who use their power to lift others up rather than tear them down." As Maya left Riverside that day, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from combat veteran to convicted felon to federal administrator. She had learned that redemption wasn't about forgetting the past, but about transforming pain into purpose and using personal experience to serve others. The quiet girl who had once been punched by a prison bully had become a teacher whose influence was reshaping how society approached conflict, justice, and the possibility of change. And in teaching others to defend themselves with dignity and restraint, she had finally found the peace that had eluded her since returning from war. Maya Chen's mission was no longer about survival. It was about creating a world where everyone understood that true strength comes from protecting others, not from defeating them. Chapter 9. The Ripple Effect. 5 years after Maya's first day as a federal administrator, she stood before a joint session of Congress, preparing to testify about the nationwide impact of her defensive training programs. The hearing room was packed with legislators, corrections officials, victims' rights advocates, and formerly incarcerated individuals whose lives had been transformed by her work. Chairwoman Rodriguez, members of the committee, Maya began, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had learned to transform pain into purpose. When I first entered the federal prison system as an inmate, I never imagined I would return as someone working to reform it. But that journey taught me something crucial about human potential, that people are capable of extraordinary change when given the right tools and opportunities. Congresswoman Maria Rodriguez, chair of the House Subcommittee on Crime and Federal Government Surveillance, leaned forward with interest. Ms. Chen, your programs are now implemented in over 200 federal and state facilities. Can you share the statistical impact of this work? Maya advanced to her first slide, displaying comprehensive data gathered over 5 years of implementation. Violence in participating facilities has decreased by an average of 71%. More significantly, recidivism rates among program participants are 34% lower than the general prison population. But the most important changes aren't captured in statistics. They're captured in the lives of people who learned that strength means protecting others, not defeating them. Representative James Walsh from Texas, known for his tough-on-crime stance, raised his hand. Ms. Chen, while these numbers are impressive, I have concerns about teaching combat techniques to convicted felons. How do we ensure this training isn't used for criminal purposes after release? Maya had anticipated this question and had extensive data to address it. Representative Walsh, that's exactly why our program focuses on defensive thinking rather than offensive techniques. We teach participants to recognize and avoid dangerous situations, to de-escalate conflicts, and to use force only as a last resort to protect themselves or others. She clicked to the next slide, showing employment and education statistics. Program participants have a 67% higher rate of completing educational programs while incarcerated, and a 45% higher rate of finding stable employment after release. When people understand their own worth and develop the confidence to protect it, they're less likely to engage in self-destructive behavior. Representative Sarah Kim from California, herself a former prosecutor, spoke up. Ms. Chen, I'm curious about the philosophical foundation of your program. How do you distinguish between teaching self-defense and potentially creating more efficient criminals? Maya paused, recognizing the deeper question about the nature of justice and rehabilitation. Representative Kim, the difference lies in the underlying motivation we teach. Traditional criminal thinking is predatory, taking what you want through force or deception. Our program teaches protective thinking, using your capabilities to defend yourself and others from harm. Can you give us a concrete example? Maya smiled, thinking of a recent success story. Last month, I received a call from Marcus Thompson, a former student from USP Atlanta. He now works as a security guard at a shopping mall in Georgia. During his shift, he witnessed 3 men attempting to assault a woman in the parking garage. Instead of using violence to stop them, Marcus used his training to create distance, called for backup, and de-escalated the situation until police arrived. No one was seriously hurt, the attackers were arrested, and the woman was safe. Marcus could have easily overpowered those men using techniques he learned in prison, Maya continued. But our program taught him that true strength means using the minimum force necessary to protect innocent people. That's the difference between criminal thinking and protective thinking. During a break in the hearing, Maya was approached by Dr. Jennifer Park, a criminologist from Georgetown University who had been studying her programs for 3 years. Maya, I wanted you to know that your work is being studied internationally. The European Union is considering implementing similar programs in their correctional systems, and I've been consulted by officials from Japan, Australia, and Canada. Maya felt a mixture of pride and responsibility. Dr. Park, that's both exciting and terrifying. Are other countries facing similar challenges with prison violence? Violence is universal, but so is the human capacity for growth and change. What you've proven is that people can learn to channel their strength in positive directions when given proper guidance and opportunities. That evening, Maya sat in her hotel room near Capitol Hill, video chatting with Sandra Williams, who was now the Director of Inmate Programs at Riverside Women's Correctional. The conversation was part of their monthly check-ins, a tradition they had maintained since Maya's release. "Sandy, sometimes I can't believe how far this has come. When I was sitting in that cell, trying to be invisible, I never imagined that incident with Carla would lead to all this." Sandra's image on the laptop screen showed a woman who had found her own sense of purpose and leadership. "Maya, you know what I think? I think everything that happened to you, the military service, the bar incident, the prison time, it was all preparation for this work. You couldn't teach people about protective strength if you hadn't experienced both sides of violence yourself. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had just kept my head down and served my time quietly, every day? And I'm grateful you didn't, because you saved more lives than you'll ever know. Not just from physical violence, but from the kind of spiritual violence that comes from believing you're powerless to change your circumstances." Maya's phone buzzed with a text message from Angela Torres, who was now a licensed social worker running a crisis intervention program for at-risk women in Sacramento. "Maya, saw your testimony on C-SPAN. You were amazing. Our program just received a federal grant to expand statewide. Your influence keeps growing." Another message came from Maria Santos, who had become a certified mediator and was working in the Los Angeles court system. "Girl, you're making us all proud. Remember when I thought fighting was the only way to get respect? Now I'm teaching judges about de-escalation techniques." Maya realized that her story had become part of a larger narrative about second chances, personal transformation, and the power of individuals to create systemic change. But more than that, it had become proof that redemption was possible for anyone willing to do the hard work of changing themselves and serving others. The next morning, Maya's final testimony focused on the future of correctional reform and the role that protective thinking could play in creating safer communities. "Members of Congress," she concluded, "5 years ago, I was released from federal prison with nothing but a conviction record and a set of combat skills that had gotten me into trouble. Today I stand before you as proof that our justice system can be both tough on crime and committed to rehabilitation. The question we face as a society is simple. Do we want our prisons to be warehouses that temporarily contain dangerous people, or do we want them to be institutions that transform dangerous people into protectors of their communities?" Chairwoman Rodriguez asked the final question of the hearing. "Ms. Chen, what would you say to critics who argue that convicted felons don't deserve second chances, or that prison should be purely punitive?" Maya thought of all the letters she had received from former inmates who were now teachers, social workers, security guards, and community leaders. "Chairwoman Rodriguez, I would say that every person has value, regardless of their worst moment. The choice isn't between punishment and rehabilitation. It's between creating cycles of violence or breaking them. I was trained as a soldier to neutralize threats, but I learned as an inmate that the most dangerous threat to any community is the belief that people can't change. When we teach someone to protect others instead of preying on them, we don't just save potential victims, we save the person who was heading down a destructive path." As Maya left the Capitol building that afternoon, she received a call that would reshape her understanding of her own impact. The caller was Colonel Patricia Hayes from the California National Guard, who had followed Maya's career since her release from prison. "Maya, I'm calling with an unusual opportunity. The Army is developing a new program for reintegrating combat veterans into civilian life. They want someone who understands both military culture and the challenges of transitioning back to society. They want you to lead it." Maya stopped walking, processing the implications of what Colonel Hayes was proposing. "Ma'am, are you offering me a position with the military? I'm offering you a chance to help prevent other veterans from following the path that led you to prison. Maya, there are thousands of combat veterans struggling with the same issues you faced: difficulty adjusting to civilian life, challenges with anger management, and the feeling that their military skills have no place in the peaceful world. What would this position involve? You'd develop and oversee programs that teach veterans how to channel their protective instincts and combat skills into positive civilian roles: security work, emergency response, community leadership. Essentially, you'd be teaching them the same principles you've taught in prisons: that strength should be used to protect, not to harm. That night, Maya sat in her apartment, looking at the commendations and awards that now filled the wall where her military medals had once hung alone. The journey from combat veteran to convicted felon to federal administrator had been painful and transformative, but it had led her to understand something crucial about the nature of service and sacrifice. Her phone rang with a call from Warden Foster at Riverside, who had become a mentor and friend over the years. "Maya, I heard about the Army offer. What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that maybe my story isn't finished yet. Maybe everything I've learned about protective strength and second chances could help prevent other veterans from making the mistakes I made." "What does your heart tell you?" Maya looked out her window at the Washington skyline, thinking about all the lives that had been touched by the programs she had developed. "My heart tells me that service takes many forms, and that the most important battles are often fought not with weapons, but with wisdom and compassion." The decision she made would determine not just her own future, but the future of thousands of veterans who were struggling to find their place in a world that no longer required their warrior skills, but desperately needed their protective instincts. Chapter 10. Full Circle. 1 year later, Maya stood in the main auditorium of the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, addressing 200 combat veterans who were participating in the first national cohort of her Veterans Transition and Community Protection Program. The audience included men and women from every branch of the military, representing conflicts from Iraq and Afghanistan to more recent operations around the globe. "When I returned from my final deployment 8 years ago," Maya began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had walked the difficult path from warrior to civilian, "I felt like I was carrying weapons in a world that had no place for them. I had been trained to neutralize threats and protect innocent people, but I couldn't figure out how to use those skills in civilian life." She looked out at faces that reflected her own past struggles, the hollow stare of post-traumatic stress, the tense posture of hypervigilance, and the lost expression of people who had been heroes overseas, but felt like strangers in their own country. That confusion led me to make choices that cost me my freedom and nearly destroyed my life. But it also taught me something that I want to share with all of you today. Our warrior skills don't have to be abandoned when we come home. They just need to be transformed. In the audience, Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez raised his hand. Maya recognized the look in his eyes, the same combination of anger and desperation she had carried for years after her discharge. "Ma'am, with all due respect, how do you transform skills that were designed for killing into something useful in civilian life? I was a sniper for 6 years. My job was to eliminate targets from long range." "What civilian employer wants those skills?" Maya nodded, understanding the deeper question behind his words. "Michael, what do you think a sniper's most important skill is?" "Accuracy, I guess. Being able to hit targets at extreme range." "Actually, it's patience. It's the ability to observe, assess, and wait for the right moment to act. It's understanding that the most important shot is often the one you don't take." Maya moved closer to the audience. "Those skills, observation, assessment, patience, and restraint, are exactly what security professionals, emergency responders, and community leaders need." She clicked to the next slide, showing employment statistics for program graduates. 78% of our graduates find employment in protective services, security, emergency response, law enforcement, or community safety roles. But more importantly, they find purpose in using their skills to serve their communities. Captain Lisa Park, an Army medic who had served 3 deployments, spoke up. "Ms. Chen, I'm interested in the psychological aspect of this transition. How do we retrain our brains to see threats differently in civilian life?" "That's the core of what we teach here, Lisa. In combat, we're trained to identify and eliminate threats quickly and decisively. In civilian life, we need to identify and de-escalate threats while preserving life whenever possible." Maya advanced to a slide showing brain imaging studies conducted in partnership with Walter Reed's Neurology Department. Dr. Sarah Kim and her team have documented actual changes in brain activity patterns among program participants. We're literally rewiring neural pathways that were optimized for combat survival to be optimized for community protection. The program Maya had developed combined elements of her prison experience with cutting-edge research in veteran transition psychology. Participants learned to channel their protective instincts into civilian roles while processing the trauma that came with military service. "The key insight," Maya explained, is that we don't need to suppress our warrior identities. We need to evolve them. A warrior protects their tribe from external threats. A community protector defends their neighbors from internal and external dangers while preserving the peace that warriors fight to create. During the lunch break, Maya was approached by General Patricia Hayes, who had been promoted to oversee all veteran transition programs for the Army. Maya, the preliminary results from this program are extraordinary. Not only are employment rates higher than any previous transition program, but psychological wellness indicators are dramatically improved. General, what we're proving is that veterans don't need to be fixed, they need to be redirected. When a combat veteran understands that their skills can serve their community, it gives them a sense of purpose that medication and traditional therapy often can't provide. The Joint Chiefs want to expand this program to all branches of the military. Maya, you could be looking at overseeing the transition of tens of thousands of veterans every year. That afternoon, Maya received a video call from Angela Torres, who was now completing her master's degree in social work while running 3 crisis intervention centers across California. Maya, I just saw the news coverage of your veteran program. Do you realize what you've created? You've built a pipeline that takes people who have been trained to use force and teaches them to use that training to protect communities. Maya reflected on Angela's observation. It's interesting how everything connects, isn't it? The principles we developed in prison, protective thinking, proportional response, de-escalation, they work just as well for combat veterans transitioning to civilian life. Have you thought about expanding beyond veterans? What about police officers, security personnel, even teachers and social workers? Anyone whose job requires them to handle conflicts and protect people could benefit from this training. The idea sparked something in Maya's mind. She had been thinking about her work in segments: prison reform, veteran transition, community safety. But Angela was suggesting something more comprehensive, a fundamental shift in how society approached the relationship between strength and protection. That evening, Maya walked through Arlington National Cemetery, visiting the grave of her former squad leader, Sergeant First Class David Chen, no relation, who had been killed by an IED during her second deployment. The setting sun cast long shadows across the white headstones that marked the sacrifice of those who had given their lives in service to their country. "Dave, I wish you could see what we're building," Maya said quietly, placing fresh flowers on his grave. "We're creating a world where the people who come home from war don't have to choose between using their skills and finding peace. They can do both." Her phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus Thompson, the former USP Atlanta inmate who was now a shopping mall security supervisor. "Maya, just wanted you to know that I'm starting college next month, criminal justice major. My goal is to become a police officer who understands that real strength comes from protecting people, not intimidating them." Another message came from Colonel Harrison, her former Army contact. "Maya, the Pentagon wants to brief you on a new initiative. They're considering making your transition philosophy part of standard discharge procedures for all combat veterans. This could affect hundreds of thousands of service members." As Maya left the cemetery that evening, she realized that her journey had come full circle in ways she never could have imagined. The broken combat veteran who had attacked 3 men in a parking lot had become someone who taught others to channel their strength toward protection rather than destruction. The convicted felon who had been attacked by a prison bully had become someone who transformed correctional institutions into places of learning and growth rather than warehouses of human misery. The federal administrator who had revolutionized prison safety had become someone who was reshaping how the nation's most highly trained warriors transitioned back to civilian life. But most importantly, the woman who had once felt that her military skills were a burden in peaceful society had become someone who proved that warriors could become the greatest protectors of peace. 6 months later, Maya stood before the United Nations General Assembly in New York, addressing representatives from 193 countries about the global applications of protective philosophy and defensive training. "Honorable delegates," she began, looking out at an audience that represented every corner of the world, "violence is a universal human experience, but so is the capacity for growth, change, and redemption. What we have learned in American prisons and military transition programs has applications far beyond our borders." She advanced to a slide showing data from pilot programs that had been implemented in 12 countries across 6 continents. When we teach people that strength should be used to protect rather than to harm, when we give them the tools to defend themselves and others with dignity and restraint, we create communities that are safer, more resilient, and more just. The delegate from Norway raised her hand. Ms. Chen, how do we ensure that these programs don't inadvertently increase violence by teaching combat techniques to civilian populations? Maya smiled, recognizing a question she had been answering for nearly a decade. Madam Ambassador, the answer lies in the philosophy we teach alongside the techniques. We don't just teach people how to defend themselves, we teach them when and why to use those skills. We teach them that true strength comes from restraint, that real power lies in protecting others, and that the highest form of victory is achieving safety without causing harm. As Maya concluded her address to the United Nations, she reflected on the ripple effect that had started with a single moment of violence in a prison cafeteria. One woman's decision to defend herself with skill and restraint had grown into a global movement that was changing how societies approached conflict, justice, and human potential. The quiet girl who had been punched by a prison bully had become a voice for protective strength that was being heard around the world, and in teaching others to defend what was precious without destroying what was human, she had finally found the peace that had eluded her since returning from war. Maya Chen's mission was no longer about surviving or even protecting. It was about proving that every person, regardless of their past, possessed the potential to become a guardian of others' safety and dignity. The warrior had become a teacher, the teacher had become a healer, and the healer had become proof that redemption was not just possible, but powerful enough to change the world.